The helicopter had no lights. It dropped out of a moonless sky at 11:47 p.m. and hit the rooftop pad of Crestview Medical Center so hard the impact rattled the vending machines on the third floor. No flight plan, no clearance, no radio contact with ground control, just the shriek of rotor blades and the thunder of boots hitting concrete before the skids had even stopped spinning. 6 men in black tactical gear poured through the stairwell door into the emergency department like smoke through a cracked window. They moved past the triage desk, past Dr. Nathan Cole, who stood frozen with a coffee cup halfway to his mouth, past the charge nurse who pressed herself flat against the wall, and they stopped in the middle of the ER, weapons low but ready, scanning every face until one of them spoke. "Emily Hart!" The operator's voice carried no inflection, not a question. Where is Emily Hart? In the corner of the room, behind a medication cart she'd been restocking for the past 20 minutes, a 31-year-old nurse in plain scrubs looked up. She didn't run. She didn't flinch. She just set down the IV bag she was holding and said, "That's me." Every person in that emergency room turned to stare at her like she'd answered a question she had no business answering. A nobody. A background figure. The nurse who got the worst shifts, ate lunch alone, and smiled through every humiliation this hospital had handed her for 3 years. The soldier closest to her exhaled with visible relief. "Ma'am," he said, "we need you, right now. If this story already has your pulse climbing, follow this channel, hit like, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far Emily Hart's story can travel." The shift had started the way most of Emily Hart's shifts started, badly. She'd arrived 7 minutes early, which meant she was technically on time by any reasonable standard, but charge nurse Patricia Doyle had been standing at the board with her arms crossed, and that particular expression she reserved for Emily, the one that suggested patience worn down to its last thread. "You're on bed turnover tonight," Doyle said without looking up from her clipboard. "Beds 3, 7, and 12 need fresh lines. After that, I need you on supply inventory." Emily didn't respond immediately. She was looking at the board. Bay 4 still had a post-op patient from the afternoon who needed a full assessment. Bay 9 had a 16-year-old with a probable concussion whose discharge paperwork had been sitting for 2 hours. "Bay 9 needs to go home," Emily said. "His neuro checks have been stable since 6. Dr. Morales will handle it. Dr. Morales is in Trauma Bay 1. Doyle finally looked at her. The look said, "I did not ask for your analysis. Bed turnover, Emily. That's where I need you." She went. She changed the linens on beds 3, 7, and 12. She restocked the supply cart. She answered a call light in the hallway from a patient who'd been waiting 40 minutes for a cup of water, which she brought without charting it because charting it would have taken longer than just getting the water. She did 6 other small invisible things that kept the floor running, and at 9:30 she was restocking the medication cart in the corner of the main ER bay when the night quieted down to that particular hum that comes in the hour before things fall apart. She'd learned to recognize that hum in another life entirely, a life nobody here knew about. Dr. Nathan Cole was holding court near the nurses' station. He was one of those emergency physicians who had mistaken volume for authority, the kind who repeated himself twice in case the first delivery hadn't landed with enough weight. He was mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the slightly theatrical bearing of someone who had been the smartest person in most rooms for long enough that he'd stopped questioning it. He was explaining to the 2 residents beside him why the new triage protocol was fundamentally flawed, and he was doing it with the cheerful confidence of a man who had never once been told to stop talking. Emily didn't dislike him exactly. She just understood him the way you understand weather. He was a condition of the environment, not a person whose approval she required. What she did dislike was the moment, 45 seconds into his monologue, when he glanced over and saw her and said, without breaking stride, "Emily, when you're done over there, I need someone to restock the suture kits. The third years keep leaving them depleted." He'd said it the way you'd speak to a piece of furniture, not unkindly, just as if she were a functional object in the room, rather than a person who'd already put in 8 hours and had a name he'd apparently only learned because Doyle had written it on the whiteboard. She didn't look up. Already done, Dr. Cole. I restocked them at 7:15. A beat. Oh. And then he continued his monologue. That was the architecture of her nights here. Task completed before it was assigned. Credit absorbed into the ambient air. Repeat. She'd been at Crestview for 3 years. She'd come here from a prior life that she'd folded up very carefully and put somewhere she didn't look at often. She had her nursing license, her ER certification, her ACLS, and TNCC credentials, all earned after leaving the military. And she was good at her job in the way that people are good at things they've done under conditions far worse than anything a civilian ER could produce. She'd triaged mass casualty events in temperatures that hit 115 degrees. She'd intubated a patient in the back of a vehicle doing 60 miles an hour on an unpaved road. She'd kept a man alive for 4 hours in a collapsed building with nothing but her hands, 2 tourniquets, and whatever she could reach. She didn't talk about any of that. There was a reason she didn't talk about it, and the reason lived in a secured folder on a flash drive that she kept in the same place every day without exception. And she didn't think about it more than she could help. Mostly she changed IV lines and restocked suture kits and smiled at Doyle's clipboard and came in on her days off when someone called in sick because she was the nurse who did that. The one who didn't complain. The one who absorbed whatever the shift required. Dr. Marcus Webb had started 6 months after Emily. He was 28, fresh out of residency, and within 3 weeks he'd received the kind of casual, institutional warmth that Emily had never quite accumulated in 3 years. People remembered his coffee order. They asked about his weekend. Doyle scheduled him for the better shifts without being asked. Emily had watched this process with no particular bitterness. She understood the mechanics of it, understood that she'd chosen a low profile, and a low profile was exactly what she got. But some nights, like this one, it landed differently. Webb found her in the hallway at 10:15, and he had the specific look of someone who was about to ask a favor they knew was impolite. Hey, Emily, right? I have a situation. He glanced down the hall. I've got a family in room 6 who want to talk to someone about their mom's discharge plan, but I need to be in trauma bay in like 4 minutes. Any chance you could... I'm not assigned to room 6, she said. I know, but you're always just... He waved a hand vaguely in the direction of everywhere. Around, and you're really good with families. She was around. That was true. She was always around, which had come to function as a kind of conscription, a tax on her competence that she paid every shift because refusing it felt like a different kind of invisible. I'll check on them, she said. You're a lifesaver. He was already moving. She stood in the hallway for exactly 1 second longer than necessary, and then she went to room 6. The family was a mother and 2 adult sons, and their grandmother was 81 with moderate dementia and a newly diagnosed UTI that had been caught before it cascaded into sepsis. Emily explained the discharge instructions twice, drew a chart of the medication schedule on the back of a paper towel because the printed sheet was confusing, answered 4 questions that the discharge nurse hadn't gotten to, and left the family calm enough that the older son thanked her by name. At 11:30, she was back at the medication cart. The ER was in that particular holding pattern that precedes a surge. 3 patients in beds, 2 in triage, the waiting room with a Tuesday night scattering of the unwell and the concerned. Overhead lights hummed. Somewhere a monitor beeped on a 4-second cycle. Cole was at the nurse's station doing chart work. Doyle was in the back. Webb had vanished into the trauma wing. Emily was inventorying IV bags when the rooftop rattled. She looked up. The others looked up too, but with the unfocused attention of people who hear something unexpected and are trying to determine whether it requires action. Emily's attention was different in quality. She'd been in enough environments where sudden, loud sounds had specific meanings that her body reacted before her mind completed the analysis. Heart rate already ticking up, weight shifting slightly forward, hands still. Then the stairwell door hit the wall like a shot, and 6 men in tactical gear came through it, and the ER stopped breathing entirely. They moved the way people moved when they had been trained not to waste a single step. Not aggressive, not sweeping for threats, not shouting, just purposeful in the absolute way that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing and why. The team leader was 6'2", dark-skinned, with a jaw that looked like it had been hewn from something structural. He scanned the room in 2 seconds flat, and then his gaze fixed on Emily. Emily Hart. Not a question. The way he said her name, she recognized the register. Not civilian, not law enforcement. Something older than both. "That's me," she said. The team leader's shoulders dropped maybe a quarter of an inch. Relief. "We have a critical patient incoming. 12 minutes out. Gunshot wound to the chest. Additional shrapnel trauma to the abdomen. Hemorrhagic shock. Our medic is down." He held her gaze. "We need you." Cole stepped forward from the nurse's station. His voice had that particular texture of a man reestablishing the natural order of things. "Okay. I'm Dr. Nathan Cole. I'm the attending on duty tonight. Whatever you've got coming in, we'll handle it. If you can give me the TAC." "We asked for Hart," the team leader said. He didn't say it rudely. He said it the way you state a coordinate. Cole blinked. "She's a nurse." "Yes, sir." The team leader didn't elaborate. Something went through Emily that she hadn't felt in 3 years. The particular interior stillness that comes right before everything gets very loud. She set down the IV bag. She looked at the team leader. "Chest wound with shrapnel abdominal. What's his pressure?" "Last read was 70 over palp. Falling. Airway?" "Maintained, but his sysats are dipping. 89, 88. "Tension pneumo," she said. A slight pause from him. "Possibly. His trachea has deviated maybe 2 centimeters. She was already moving toward the trauma bay. I need chest decompression supplies. A 14-gauge angiocath, thoracostomy tray on standby, 2 large-bore IVs already drawn up, O-negative blood from the fridge. How many units do you have?" This last question directed at the supply tech who'd appeared in the doorway. "We have 4 units of O-neg in the—" "Get all 4 to Trauma 1 now, not when I ask again. Now." She turned back to the team leader. "How long was he in the field before extraction?" "Approximately 40 minutes from time of injury." "Any field interventions?" "Tourniquet to the left arm, wound packing to 2 abdominal injuries, 1 round of TXA given 9 minutes ago." TXA, tranexamic acid, a clot-preserving drug used in military field medicine, not standard in civilian pre-hospital care. She absorbed this without commenting. Cole had followed her into the trauma bay. "Emily, I understand you want to help, but I'm the attending. Whatever they've got coming in, I'll lead the rhesus." She looked at him once. "Have you managed penetrating chest trauma with suspected tension pneumo and traumatic hemorrhagic shock simultaneously?" A pause. Cole had worked urban ER for 11 years. He was a competent physician. "I've managed chest trauma." "Okay." She turned back to the supply tray. "Then stand where I can see you and listen." She didn't say it to diminish him. She said it the same way she'd said everything else, because it was the necessary information for the situation. The team leader, who had been watching this exchange, looked away and said something quiet into his radio. The next 8 minutes had the quality of a very fast dream. Emily prepped the trauma bay with the focused economy of someone running a mental checklist she'd run 1,000 times in worse conditions. She walked the ER nurses, 2 of them, both staring at her like she'd become a different person, through exactly what they needed to do and in what order. She pulled on gloves and a gown. She stood at the head of the bay with everything she needed within arm's reach, and she waited. He came in at 11:51 p.m. The man on the gurney was 50-something, built like someone who had spent a career in physical service, and he was the gray-white color that hemorrhagic shock produces in people who are running out of time. His name, she would learn it later, was Commander David Reyes. He was unconscious. His blood pressure, according to the medic who'd ridden in with him, was now 62 over palp. His oxygen saturation was 86 and dropping. His trachea, she could see even before she touched him, had deviated visibly to the right. Left tension pneumothorax. The air trapped in his chest cavity was collapsing his lung and pushing his heart sideways. In the next 4 minutes, his heart would stop. She had the angiocath in her hand before the gurney locked into position. "I need everyone who isn't doing something specific to move back," she said. Not loudly, just clearly. Cole said, "Emily, Dr. Cole, I need you at his head monitoring airway. If his SATs don't come up in 60 seconds after I decompress, we're going to need to intubate. Can you manage that?" A beat. He moved to the head of the bed. She found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, cleaned the site in 2 seconds, and drove the needle in. The hiss of released air was audible across the trauma bay. Every person in the room heard it. The effect was almost immediate. The displaced tension in Reyes's chest easing, his breathing deepening fractionally, his color changing incrementally from ash toward something less final. His oxygen saturation climbed. 86, 88, 91. "Blood pressure," she said. "Coming up," one of the nurses said. 78/40. Emily was already moving to the abdominal wound packing, checking the field dressings, assessing the shrapnel injuries. She called blood products, called for warming blankets, called the readings on his next vitals before they came in, and was right on 3 of 4. She worked quietly and without drama, narrating just enough for the room to follow, and for 6 full minutes nobody said anything except in direct response to her. Then one of the tactical operators, a younger man, early 30s, who'd positioned himself at the bay entrance, moved 2 steps closer. He was watching Reyes. His face had the specific tightness of someone managing something that isn't just professional. Emily glanced up. "You know him?" Not a question. "He's my CO," the man said. His voice was flat, controlled. "He's been my commanding officer for 6 years. She looked back at Reyes. "Then you can stay. Don't touch anything." The young soldier nodded once. Cole was watching Emily with an expression she'd never seen him aim at her before. It wasn't respect exactly. It was more like recalibration, the specific look of a person updating a database. At 12:08 a.m., Commander David Reyes' blood pressure had stabilized at 94/60. His oxygen saturation was holding at 94%. He was still unconscious, still critical, still very much not out of the woods. But he was alive in a way he hadn't been 4 minutes ago, and the math of that was clear to everyone in the room. The team leader had come into the bay. He was watching Emily with a look she recognized from years past, the look of someone confirming something they'd already believed. "You were right," he said to someone on his radio. "She's still got it." Emily was charting vitals and didn't respond, but she heard it. It was Cole who spoke first, and he spoke quietly, as if there were things in the room now that required a different volume. "Emily." He waited until she looked up. "What? Where did you learn to do that?" She pulled off her outer glove. "I need to call the surgical team," she said. "He's going to need exploratory surgery on those abdominal injuries once he's stable enough to move." Cole nodded, didn't push it. The young soldier at the bay entrance said, Is there somewhere I can make a call? I need to report his status." "Family lounge is down the hall on your left," Emily said. "Through the double doors." He nodded and started to move, then stopped. He turned back, and what he said next, said quietly, said to the floor more than to her, changed the temperature of the room. "The people who did this," he said. "They knew exactly where he'd be, exactly when he'd move. This wasn't random." He looked up at her. Someone inside gave them everything they needed. Emily went very still. His mission profile was classified at the highest level, the insertion window, the extraction route, everything. There are maybe 12 people who had access to that information. He paused. And one of them might have had a reason to want Commander Reyes to disappear. The trauma bay was quiet. Emily's hand had gone to the edge of the supply cart without her consciously directing it. Her knuckles were white against the stainless steel edge, because she knew something about classified mission profiles, about information that got out when it shouldn't have, about the specific feeling of watching something unravel from the inside and realizing too late that the corruption went higher than you'd thought possible. She'd lived that. She'd nearly been buried by it. "What's his unit?" she said. Her voice was careful and even. The team leader glanced at her from across the bay. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like a door opening that he'd been waiting for her to find. "7th Special Operations Task Group," he said. "Secondary attachment to CENTCOM Joint Intelligence." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "I know that unit," she said. The words landed quietly, too quietly, the kind of quiet that precedes something large. And before anyone could respond, before the team leader could explain what he clearly already knew, before the young soldier at the door could finish whatever he'd been about to say, the lights went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, cut. Every fluorescent strip in the emergency department went dark simultaneously, dropping the room into a blackness that lasted exactly 3 seconds before the emergency generators kicked in and painted everything in that particular amber red that hospital backup lighting produces. A color that makes the ordinary look like a warning. Emily's hand was already on the penlight at her waist. She swept the beam across the trauma bay, confirmed Reyes was still stable on battery backup monitoring, and then looked at the team leader. His expression had changed entirely. He had his radio up, his other hand moving toward his sidearm. "That wasn't a power failure," he said. And somewhere in the hospital, from the direction of the main entrance, came the sound of doors opening that should not have been opened. The sound wasn't loud. That was the thing about it. It wasn't the crash of forced entry or the alarm shriek of a tripped sensor. It was the specific soft thud of a door that someone had opened with a key or a code, or something that gave them the right to be here without triggering a single notification. Which was worse. Which meant whoever had just entered Crestview Medical Center's main corridor knew the building's systems the way you only know a building if you've spent time studying it. The team leader, his name, Emily would learn in the next 4 minutes, was Sergeant First Class Darius Holt, had already moved to the bay entrance and pressed himself against the wall to the left of the doorframe. He was on his radio in a voice so low it was nearly subvocal, and his right hand rested on his sidearm with the ease of a man who had done this before in rooms considerably less sterile. "Talk to me," Emily said quietly. Not to Holt, to the young soldier Shaw, she still didn't have his name, who had moved to Reyes's bedside and was watching the monitors with the particular focus of someone who needs to be doing something useful. "His pressure's holding," the soldier said. 92/58. "Good. Stay at his head. If that alarm goes off," she pointed at the cardiac monitor, "you press that button and you yell my name. You don't leave him." The soldier nodded. He looked young in the backup lighting, 26 maybe. The kind of young that combat ages sideways rather than forward. Not older in the face, just different. Like something behind the eyes had been rearranged. Dr. Cole had positioned himself near the supply shelves with the expression of a man who had arrived at a situation his training had not adequately prepared him for. He was holding his penlight with both hands. Is there a lockdown protocol we should... "Doyle, Emily called toward the hallway. Patricia Doyle materialized in the doorway 30 seconds later, which meant she'd been close enough to have heard everything and had been deciding whether to engage. Emily had always respected that about Doyle, even when Doyle was at her most difficult. She was a careful woman who calculated before she moved. "I need the ER on soft lockdown," Emily said. "Non-emergency patients redirect to the north wing. Staff pull back from the main corridor. Don't announce it overhead." Doyle stared at her. "You don't have authority to..." "Patricia." Emily said it the way she said everything tonight. Not unkindly, just precisely. "Do you want to argue that right now?" A beat. Doyle looked at Holt against the wall, at the soldier by Reyes's bed, at Cole holding his penlight. She looked back at Emily. "North wing redirect," she said, and was gone. Holt turned from the wall. Whatever he'd heard on his radio had sharpened his face. "I've got 2 of my men on the south entrance and 1 on the stairwell. Whoever came in through the main..." They're not moving fast. They're looking for something. Or someone, Emily said. Holt looked at her. Yeah. The amber-red emergency lighting made the trauma bay look like the interior of a bad dream. All shadow and hard edge, and the soft rhythmic beeping of the monitors keeping time over everything like a metronome that didn't care about context. Emily moved to the bay's secondary entrance, the one that connected to the corridor behind the nurses' station, and cracked it 2 inches. The main hallway was empty. The overhead backup strips cast their dull light in both directions without revealing anything. But there was a sound, but barely, almost below the threshold, of footsteps that stopped too deliberately to be natural. Someone was moving and then stopping, moving and stopping, the way you move through a building when you're checking sight lines. She pulled the door closed. How many? She said to Holt. My men haven't confirmed a number. At least 1, possibly 3. He paused. They're using the same access codes as the hospital facilities team, which means either they hacked the system or they had help. Cole said, This is a hospital. You can't just... There are patients here. There are... Dr. Cole? Holt didn't raise his voice. I understand. We're going to do everything we can to contain this away from the patient areas. Right now, I need you to stay in this room. I'm the attending on duty. You have a critical patient who needs monitoring. Emily said it over her shoulder. That's what you have right now. Cole closed his mouth. He looked at Reyes on the table, the chest decompression catheter, the blood products running through 2 large-bore IVs, the monitors broadcasting their steady green data, and he moved back to the bedside. Emily looked at Holt. Tell me what I need to know. He studied her for a moment, not evaluating whether she could handle it. She'd resolved that question in the last 40 minutes. More like deciding how much of an explanation was owed to a person who'd already proven she understood the stakes. Commander Reyes has been running a counterintelligence investigation for 14 months, Holt said, keeping his voice low and level. Suspected penetration of the task group at the senior level. Someone has been feeding operational details to a network we've been trying to identify for 2 years. Mission windows, asset locations, communication protocols. 3 operations compromised. 7 personnel either killed or in hostile custody. He stopped. Tonight was supposed to be a controlled extraction. Only 6 people knew the route. 1 of them burned it. Emily processed this without expression. And Reyes got hit because he was about to identify the source. He was 48 hours from filing a formal report. Someone moved up the timeline. The young soldier at the bedside, he said, without looking up from the monitor. His name is Garrett, Specialist Garrett Owens. He meant himself. He offered it like he felt the absence of it. I've been with the commander's unit for 2 years. Owens, Emily repeated. She filed it. The woman who brought us here, Owens said. The coordinator who told us about you. She said you'd know what this was about. She said you'd been through something like this before. He finally looked up. She said you got pushed out for seeing something you weren't supposed to see. The trauma bay was quiet except for the monitors. Emily looked at the wall for a moment. Not spacing out, just placing something very carefully back in its container before she continued. Who's the coordinator? She said. Holt said, Major Lena Vasquez. She's been running the CI investigation from the CENTCOM side. She's the one who pulled your file. Vasquez, Emily said. The name meant nothing to her, but the situation it described, the shape of it, the specific architecture of a person being forced out before they could talk. That she recognized the way you recognize a house you've lived in, even if the furniture has changed. She had been 28 when it happened. She'd been a staff sergeant in a forward-deployed medical unit attached to an intelligence collection team, and she'd made the mistake of noticing things that she wasn't supposed to notice. Discrepancies between mission reports and what she'd actually witnessed in the field, logistics expenditures that didn't match any operation she'd been assigned to, a casualty report for an operator she had personally treated who was very much alive. She'd done what she'd been trained to do. She'd documented what she found. She'd brought it to her direct superior, And 2 weeks later, she'd received paperwork initiating a separation process based on an allegation of conduct unbecoming. An allegation so vague and so specifically timed that she'd understood immediately what it actually was. She hadn't fought it, not because she was afraid, because the man who signed the paperwork was the same man who had access to every piece of evidence she'd collected, and fighting him through official channels would have meant handing him the opportunity to bury everything she had before it could be seen by anyone else. So she'd left. She'd taken what she had, and she'd left, and she'd waited. 3 years. She'd become a nurse in a civilian ER where nobody asked about her past, and the biggest power dynamic she had to navigate was Patricia Doyle's scheduling preferences. She'd made herself invisible, and she'd waited for the moment when visibility would mean something. She had not expected the moment to arrive at midnight in a hospital under emergency power with a critically wounded commander on a trauma table. Life, she'd found, was not particular about its timing. A sound from the hallway, closer now. The soft step and stop, and then nothing. And the nothing was worse because it meant whoever was out there had found something to look at or listen to. Holt touched his earpiece. Something crossed his face. Not alarm exactly, but adjacent to it. 2 of my men just reported a third party in the East Corridor. Male. No hospital ID visible. He's made them and he's moving back toward the main entrance. He's alone? Appears to be. But my men think he was communicating. Had an earpiece, they said. Emily moved to the supply cabinet on the near wall, opened it, and began pulling supplies with the efficiency of someone who had already decided what came next. 2 tourniquets, a chest seal kit, extra gloves. She loaded them into the cargo pocket of her scrubs without theater. Cole watched her. "What are you doing?" "Being prepared." "Prepared for what?" She looked at him. "Doctor." "Cole, I need you to think about what you would do if you had to run a full trauma resus with no support staff, in the dark, with whatever's on that tray." She nodded toward the bedside cart. "Because that might be where we're headed. Can you do that?" He didn't answer immediately. That was actually the right response. It was better than a reflexive yes, which would have told her he hadn't really heard the question. "I'd need you to walk me through the hemorrhage management protocol," he said finally. "The sequence you used, I've seen versions of it, but not that specific." "Okay," she said. "I'll walk you through it. Stay close and pay attention." She moved back to Reyes. "His MAP is still borderline. We need to run the second unit of ONEG and get a repeat pressure in 10 minutes. Cole moved to her left and she began explaining, not condescendingly, not patiently in the way that condescension disguises itself as patience. Just directly, clinician to clinician, because he was the physician of record for this patient and he needed the information, and the emergency lighting didn't care about hierarchy. Owens, from the opposite side of the bed, said quietly, "He's going to make it, right?" Emily kept her eyes on the IV line. "He's got a better chance than he did 40 minutes ago." "That's not really an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's not." Owens absorbed this. "The commander, he talked about you, not by name, but he talked about a case, a medic who got forced out because of what she found. He said it was the worst outcome of the whole investigation." He paused. "He said if he could go back, he would have handled it differently, would have protected the people who came forward instead of letting the chain of command bury them." Emily's hands didn't stop moving, but something in her posture changed. A very small change, the kind that wouldn't read from more than 3 feet away. "He should have gotten further," she said. "He's further than I thought anyone would get. He got this far because of what you left behind." She looked up. "What?" Owens met her eyes. "The documentation you compiled before you left the unit. 3 years ago. Major Vasquez found it 8 months into the investigation. It was embedded in a legacy server archive that nobody had cleared. It corroborated everything the commander was finding: financial records, personnel discrepancies, the altered casualty reports." He held her gaze. "You didn't disappear. You left a trail." The monitors beeped. The backup lighting hummed its amber red note. From somewhere in the hospital, a door closed. Emily said, "Where's Major Vasquez now?" She was supposed to be in the air, Holt said from the doorway. She was flying in with a second team. She should have been here by now. The word should sat in the room for a moment. Try her again, Emily said. Holt keyed his radio, static. He shifted frequencies. More static. He tried a third. I've got nothing. Jammed? Or she's in a dead zone. He didn't sound convinced by his own alternative. Emily turned back to Reyes and checked his pupils, still sluggish but reactive both sides. She adjusted his head position slightly. His color had come back enough to be recognizable as the color of a living person rather than the color of someone in the process of becoming something else. He's going to need OR, she said. Those abdominal injuries. The packing is holding, but it's not a solution. He needs a surgeon inside there tonight. Can you get a surgeon here? Holt said. I can get a surgeon here, Cole said, with the particular tone of a man who has been a passenger long enough to need to drive something. I'll call Dr. Ewan. She's our best trauma surgeon, and she lives 8 minutes away. Emily nodded. Do it. Cole stepped to the corner with his phone. The call lasted 45 seconds. When he came back, he said, She's coming. That was something. That was a concrete thing that moved in the right direction, and Emily registered it the same way she registered all useful developments in a crisis. Quickly, without celebration, and already calculating what came next. What came next arrived in a form she hadn't anticipated. The trauma bay door, the main one, the one off the ER floor, opened. Not Doyle. Not one of Holt's men. Not a hospital staff member. The man who walked in was wearing civilian clothes, dark slacks, a gray button-down that probably cost more than Emily's monthly rent, and the specific unhurried expression of someone who has calculated that he has every right to be wherever he is. He was mid-50s, silver-haired, with the kind of broad-shouldered, square-jawed bearing that the military builds and money maintains. He moved through the door the way people move through doors they own. Holt had his weapon out before the man had taken 2 full steps. Don't, the man said, calmly. He raised both hands, but slowly, with the deliberateness of someone demonstrating patience rather than compliance. His eyes had already moved past Holt and landed on the figure on the trauma table. He looked at Reyes for a long moment, and his expression did something complicated. Something that was maybe regret and maybe satisfaction and wasn't entirely either. Then he looked at Emily, and Emily looked at him. She knew his face. Not from this hospital, not from this life. From the other one, the one she'd folded up and put away. She knew his face from a briefing room in a forward operating base 4 years ago, where he'd stood at the front of the room in a uniform with stars on the collar and delivered an operations order with the casual authority of a man who had been making decisions about other people's lives for so long he'd stopped noticing the weight of it. He'd been a brigadier general then. The silver on his collar was different now. She couldn't see it under the civilian clothes. But the face was the same, the specific economy of expression, the sense of a man who had never in his professional life been required to explain himself to someone below his rank. His name was Colonel, former brigadier general, now something murkier, Warren Ashby. And he was the man who had signed her separation paperwork. The room had gone completely still. Even the monitor seemed to hold for a beat. Holt said, Sir, I need you to identify yourself and explain. Warren Ashby, the man said. Former SOCOM J3, current advisor to the Defense Acquisition Board. He said it pleasantly, like an introduction at a dinner party. I'm not armed. I don't need to be. His eyes stayed on Emily. Emily, I've been looking forward to this for a while. Emily's voice came out even. She'd prepared for this longer than she'd known she was preparing. Colonel Ashby. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who has arrived at a conclusion he finds satisfying. I heard you'd hidden yourself well, a civilian ER nurse. He glanced around the trauma bay. Although I have to say, hidden in plain sight is still hidden. You've spent 3 years waiting for something. What exactly were you waiting for? She didn't answer. He looked at Reyes. He's alive. That's unfortunate, but not decisive. He looked back at her. Whatever Reyes was building, whatever Vasquez thought she had, it ends tonight. The documentation you collected before you left the unit has been flagged and quarantined. Every server archive that Vasquez accessed has been locked down. He tilted his head. So whatever you thought you were holding on to, it's gone. He said it with the calm of a man who has already verified the thing he's saying. Not a bluff. A report. The monitors beeped. Emily's expression didn't change. She said, "What documentation?" A fraction of a pause. So small most people wouldn't catch it. Ashby recalibrated. The files on the legacy server. The records you embedded before. I don't know what you're talking about, Emily said. Owens, across the bed, had gone very still. Holt's weapon was still raised. Cole was pressed against the supply shelves, looking like a man who had walked into the wrong film. Ashby studied her. The pleasant expression had developed a hairline crack. You compiled documentation, casualty discrepancies, financial records. You embedded them in the server archive before your separation. No, Emily said. I didn't. She held his gaze without blinking. I didn't embed anything in any server archive, she said, because I knew that was the first place anyone would look. She reached into the chest pocket of her scrub top, slowly making the movement visible, and produced a flash drive. It was small and unremarkable, the kind that cost $4 at any pharmacy, with a piece of medical tape wrapped around it that had her initials written in ballpoint. She held it up. I've been carrying it for 3 years, she said. The crack in Ashby's expression widened. That's not... The server archive was a copy, she said. Incomplete. Missing the financial transfer records and about 60 pages of altered after-action reports. I kept those. She closed her hand around the drive. I kept everything that would make the rest of it make sense. The room was absolutely silent. And then Ashby moved, not toward her, not for the drive, but toward the door, and Holt stepped directly into his path, with the calm certainty of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. Sir, Holt said, I can't let you leave. Ashby looked at him. The pleasant expression was fully gone now. What was under it was less polished, older, harder, the actual face of a man who had operated for 2 decades in the specific confidence that rank and access would always resolve in his favor. You're making a mistake, Ashby said. You understand that? Whatever you think this is, I think it's a detention, Holt said, pending contact with Major Vasquez. Vasquez is... Ashby stopped himself. Emily watched him stop himself. She watched the micro-correction, the mouth closing over the next word before it arrived. And she understood, with a cold clarity that settled into the center of her chest like ballast, exactly what the stopped sentence had been about to say. Where is Major Vasquez? She said. Ashby said nothing. Holt, she said it without raising her voice. Try Vasquez again. Holt keyed his radio. Static. He tried the secondary frequency. More static. He looked at Emily with an expression that said what his voice didn't. Emily looked at Ashby. What did you do? He was looking at the wall now. The calculation behind his eyes was visible, not the decision-making of a man in control, but the rapid triage of a man identifying the least bad option. She was going to land with a second team, Emily said. She was supposed to be here by now. She watched him. You didn't jam the communications. You redirected her flight. No answer. Or you did something worse. The monitor behind her produced a single sharp alarm. Not the cardiac alarm, the pressure cuff cycling through an automatic read, and she turned reflexively, checked Reyes's numbers, adjusted the IV rate. His pressure was holding. She turned back. Ashby had used the 4 seconds. He hadn't gone for the door. He'd gone for Cole. And he had Cole's arm behind his back with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd trained in close quarters for 20 years, and he had Cole positioned between himself and Holt with a grip that looked casual until you noticed where his thumb was. Cole made a sound. Not quite pain. The anticipation of it. I'm going to walk out, Ashby said. He comes with me to the corridor. When I'm clear, I let him go. He looked at Emily. The drive. Set it on the table. Emily looked at Cole. Cole's face was white and sweating, and he was breathing in the short, controlled way of a man trying very hard not to panic. His eyes were on her with something she hadn't seen in them before. Not the evaluating look of a physician or the baffled look of a superior recalibrating his assessment. Just a person, scared, looking at the only person in the room who seemed to know what was happening. She looked at Ashby. Then she set the flash drive on the table. Ashby's grip on Cole shifted slightly, the adjustment of a man who is about to move, making sure his leverage is sound. And Emily said conversationally, "That drive is empty." A beat. "It's a pharmacy drive I picked up 2 weeks ago," she said. 4 gigabytes. Nothing on it. I use it as a bookmark." Ashby stared at her. She looked back at him with the same level expression she'd worn for 3 years behind a medication cart, absorbing insults and extra shifts and every version of invisible that a hospital could offer a person who had decided to wait. "You just told me the server archive was quarantined," she said, "which means you've been watching it, which means you've been watching for me to access it." She tilted her head slightly. "And I haven't accessed it once in 3 years. Because everything I actually have—" She stopped. She let the sentence end there. Ashby's face in the amber red light of the emergency backup power was a very specific kind of pale. From somewhere in the hospital, from the direction of the main entrance, from a part of the building that Holt's team did not cover, came the sound of multiple sets of boots moving fast, not stopping this time, not step and pause, moving with the full certainty of people who know exactly where they're going. Holt moved first, not toward Ashby, toward the door, pressing himself to the wall beside the frame with his weapon up and his head angled to listen. The footsteps in the corridor were multiplying, and they had a cadence that was distinct from Holt's own team. Slightly heavier, slightly faster, the particular rhythm of people who had not been here long enough to know the building's acoustic quirks. Holt's men moved quietly because they'd walked these halls for 40 minutes. Whoever was out there was moving on a map, not on memory. "How many?" Emily said. 3, maybe 4, Holt said, moving from the main entrance toward us. Ashby still had Cole. He'd backed 2 steps toward the secondary exit, the one Emily had used earlier to check the corridor, and Cole's face had passed through white and arrived somewhere grayer. He was sweating through his collar. His right arm was cranked up at an angle that wasn't comfortable, and he was smart enough not to fight it, which Emily registered as a point in his favor. "Emily!" Ashby's voice had lost the dinner party quality. What was under it was harder and less groomed. "Whatever you think you're doing, this ends badly for everyone in this room if those men come through that door." "Who are they?" she said. He didn't answer. "Ashby." She said his name without the rank, and the omission was deliberate, and he heard it. "You used hospital access codes. You redirected a military flight. You walked into a secured medical area while a critical patient is on the table. That's not the behavior of someone who thinks he's going to walk away clean." She looked at him steadily. "So who's coming?" Cole made a sound. Not pain, just the involuntary noise of a man reaching a threshold. Ashby's grip tightened briefly, and Cole went still again. From the corridor, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was approximately 8 seconds long and felt much longer. Then a voice, male, flat, carrying the cadence of someone reading from a script they'd memorized thoroughly, came through the door. "Sergeant Holt, this is a lawful order. Stand down and secure your weapon. We are authorized to take custody of the patient and any associated personnel." Holt looked at Emily. The question on his face wasn't, "Should I comply?" It was, "What do you need me to do while I don't?" "Authorized by whom?" Emily called. A pause. Then, "Ma'am, this doesn't concern Authorized by whom?" she said again. Same volume, same inflection, like the first time had been a rough draft. Another pause, longer this time. Owens from Reyes's bedside said very quietly, "Those aren't our people." "How do you know?" Cole managed. "Because our people would have said a name." Emily moved to the medication cart and opened the second drawer down. She'd stocked this cart herself at the start of the shift, which meant she knew exactly what was in it and in what order. She found what she needed in 14 seconds. The sealed crash kit she'd checked at 7 p.m., the secondary IV supplies she'd organized by type, and a roll of surgical tape. She began prepping Reyes's IV lines for rapid mobility, not disconnecting anything, just ensuring that if the table needed to move, it could move without losing access. "What are you doing?" Cole said. "He can't stay in a fixed position if this room becomes a problem," she said. "Help me unlock the bed wheels." Cole stared at her for a beat. Then he moved to the foot of the bed and found the wheel lock and released it. "Holt," she said without looking up, "is there a way to the surgical wing that doesn't go through the main corridor?" "The service elevator," Holt said. "East side. My man Kowalski is positioned near it." "How far?" 90 feet, maybe 100. She looked at Reyes's monitors. His pressure was at 88/54, which was not good, but was not the emergency it had been an hour ago. His O2 sat was 93. Moving him was a risk. Leaving him here with whatever was on the other side of that door was a different kind of risk, and she was in the business of calculating which risks were preferable. "We move him in 4 minutes," she said. "I need those 4 minutes to stabilize the IV set up for transport." "We're not going anywhere," Ashby said from across the room. Nobody responded to him. That was the moment, Emily would think later, when something finally visibly shifted in Warren Ashby. He had spent a career in rooms where his voice produced responses, where speaking meant being heard meant being obeyed, and obedience was simply the correct ordering of the world. And now he was in a room where 3 people were actively working around him as if he were a piece of furniture, and the man he was using as leverage was breathing steadily and watching a nurse prep an IV line with the focused attention of someone learning something they planned to use. And the tactical operator by the door had not once in the last 3 minutes looked at Ashby as a primary concern. "I have a doctor," Ashby said, louder. "You have a physician," Emily said, without looking up. "There's a difference." She finished taping the IV junction and checked the line patency. "Dr. Cole, how's his temperature?" Cole, his arm still at the uncomfortable angle, his voice admirably level, said, "I can't reach the thermometer." Emily walked to the supply tray, picked up the tympanic thermometer, and brought it to the bedside, passing within 4 feet of Ashby and not altering her pace or trajectory by a single degree. Ashby watched her do this. Something in the watching had changed quality. It was no longer the surveillance of a man controlling a room. It was closer to the attention of a man trying to understand how a situation he'd fully mapped had developed a feature he hadn't planned for. 96.4, Cole said, reading the thermometer. "He's running cold. We need to get another warming blanket on him before we move." Emily turned to Owens. "In the cabinet behind you, second shelf." Owens found the warming blanket and passed it over without being asked twice. He was proving to be the kind of person who, under pressure, became more useful rather than less, a quality Emily had noticed in the first 20 minutes and had quietly filed. From the corridor, the voice again. "We're coming in." Holt said, "If you open that door, I will not be responsible for—" The door opened. 3 men. Civilian clothes, same general template as Ashby. Expensive, dark, the assembled appearance of authority, but they were moving wrong. Too bunched, not enough spacing, the kind of entry pattern that people learn from a training environment rather than from having actually cleared a room under conditions where the clearing mattered. Emily clocked all of this in about 2 seconds, and it told her something useful. These were not operators. They were security contractors, maybe. Former law enforcement, possibly, but not special operations. The one in front held up a laminated card. "Federal Contractor Authority. We are here to secure the patient and associated That's not a federal credential," Holt said. He'd moved to a position that gave him sightlines on all 3 and coverage of the room's critical points without making his strategy obvious. "That's a private security license." A pause. The man with the card recalibrated. "We operate under a classified federal mandate." "Then produce the mandate." The mandate is classified. Right. Holt looked at Emily. 4 minutes? 3 now, she said, and kept working. What happened next happened because Ashby made a decision, and the decision was the wrong one. And it was the wrong one because he was a man who had spent 20 years in a professional environment where the wrong decisions had always been someone else's problem. He released Cole's arm, not gently, but with the abrupt movement of a man dropping something he's decided is no longer useful. And he stepped forward toward the lead contractor with his chin up and his voice reclaiming its full register. "This is my operation," Ashby said. "I told you to contain the corridor, not to come in here and advertise. Sir, we lost the perimeter on the south side. Holt's men pushed through and we've got— That's not my concern right now." Ashby pointed at the bed. "We take the patient. We take her." He pointed at Emily. "Everything else is secondary." Cole, freed, moved 2 steps left and stood beside Emily. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, in the amber-red light, between Ashby's pointing finger and the patient's bed, and the positioning was not accidental. Emily looked at him for half a second, and Cole looked back with the expression of a man who has identified where his particular line is and has stepped across it. It wasn't a heroic moment. He was shaking slightly, and he knew and she knew that he was not equipped for what this night had become. But he was there. "Owens?" she said. "Are you carrying?" "Yes, ma'am." "Stay at his head. Don't draw unless Holt tells you to." "Understood." The lead contractor was looking at the gun Holt hadn't put away, then at Ashby, then back at the gun, running a private calculation. His 2 colleagues had spread slightly, which was better spacing than the entry, but still telegraphed that they were responding to training recall rather than actual read of the situation. The one on the left was watching the door. The one on the right was watching Owens. Neither of them had looked at Emily in the last 90 seconds, which told her she was still, in this room, invisible to the people who hadn't earned the right to see her clearly. That was fine. Invisibility had always been a tool. She finished the IV prep. She checked Reyes's tube placement, listened to bilateral breath sounds, still present, slightly diminished on the left where the tension pneumo had been, which was expected and within acceptable parameters. She checked his pupils one more time. Sluggish, but responsive. She adjusted the pressure on the wound packing at his left abdomen, which had soaked through more than she'd like, and made a note to herself that the surgical team was going to find active bleeding in the splenic region, and she needed to brief Dr. Yuen on that the moment she arrived. She looked at Holt. "Ready." He looked at the 3 contractors, at Ashby, at the door. "My man Kowalski is on the east corridor. Once we start moving, we don't stop." "Agreed." Ashby said, "Emily, listen to me." She looked at him. "Whatever you're carrying on that drive," he said, "it's not enough. You understand? I have spent 14 years building operational relationships across 5 commands. Whatever you documented, I have people who can contextualize, who can reframe it," she said. He paused. "Yes. Make the evidence look like the product of a disgruntled service member with an agenda." Another pause. The pauses were getting shorter, which meant he was conceding ground he didn't want to concede. "The institutional weight is not on your side." "It wasn't on my side 3 years ago either," Emily said. "That's not new information." She moved to the head of the bed and took the position. "Dr. Cole, you're on the foot. Owens, you stay on his left and keep that line clear." Cole moved to the foot without being asked a second time. "Holt," Emily said. "Door." Holt went to the secondary exit, checked it, and opened it. The corridor beyond was empty and dim and smelled of floor wax and recycled air. Kowalski was visible at the far end, a figure in the red-amber light, weapon low, watching the east junction. The bed began to move. Ashby took 2 steps toward them, and the lead contractor, reassessing his options, moved with him, and Holt turned in the doorway with his weapon up and the specific body posture of someone who is not making a threat but is communicating a certainty, and Ashby stopped. Cole was pulling the bed through the door. Owens was managing the IV lines with focused care, walking sideways to keep the access points clean. The wheels on the bed were doing the thing that hospital bed wheels do, catching slightly, requiring more force than expected, the left front one tracking a few degrees off true, but they moved, and the corridor received them, and the door swung closed behind. The service elevator was 60 feet away, and it felt like more. Kowalski met them at the junction without speaking, fell in on the rear, and the small convoy moved down the east corridor with the particular quality of urgency that doesn't announce itself as urgency because announcement would cost time they didn't have. Reyes's pressure cuff cycled, 86/50. The movement wasn't helping. Emily reached across and adjusted the O-neg drip rate without stopping the bed's momentum, which required a specific physical calculation involving her center of gravity and the height of the IV pole, and she got it on the second try, and the second try was good enough. "He's dropping," Cole said. "I know." "Emily." "I know." She looked at the elevator door 20 feet ahead. "Kowalski, is Ewan upstairs?" "She arrived 4 minutes ago," Kowalski said. "She's in OR2 prepping. When we get him up there, I need you to find her and tell her probable splenic laceration and possible hepatic involvement. Tell her his last MAP was 53 and trending down. Tell her we've had 2 units of O-negative in and she's going to want 2 more in the room before she opens." "Copy." The elevator arrived. They loaded the bed in a process that was not graceful. The left front wheel caught the elevator threshold, and Cole swore under his breath, and Owens repositioned the IV pole one-handed while bracing the rail with the other. But they got in, and the doors closed, and for a moment the elevator was a small sealed world where nothing was coming in. Emily looked at Reyes's face. He was pale and still and alive. And the fact of his being alive was the result of 11 specific decisions she'd made in the last hour and a half. And she did not spend time being grateful for the outcome because gratitude was a post-crisis luxury and they were not past the crisis. But she registered it. She put it somewhere. Cole was looking at her with the look she'd been cataloging since midnight, the look of a physician running an ongoing revised assessment of a colleague he'd fundamentally misjudged. "The flash drive," he said. "The real one." "Yes." "Where is it?" She looked at him. "Somewhere I've kept it for 3 years without losing it." He processed this. "Okay," he said, and let it go, which was the correct response. The elevator opened onto the surgical floor, and Kowalski was already moving toward OR2. Emily and Cole and Owens brought the bed down the hall and through the pre-op bay doors, and Dr. Helen Ewan was there, 52, compact, with the unhurried manner of a surgeon who has been woken in the middle of the night enough times that midnight no longer produces any particular register of alarm. She looked at Reyes, looked at Emily, looked at the IV setup, and said, "Tell me." Emily told her in 90 seconds. Penetrating chest trauma. Tension. Pneumo relieved by needle decompression, 2 abdominal entry wounds packed in the field, shrapnel pattern suggesting fragmentation device at close range, probable splenic laceration based on percussion and left flank rigidity, possible hepatic involvement, 2 units O, negative in, current MAP, approximately 50, hypothermic at 96.4. Ewan listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, Ewan said, "Good call on the needle decompression. Any contraindications I need to know before I put him under?" His TXA was given approximately 90 minutes ago. That's the only medication I'm aware of. Allergies? Unknown. Ewan looked at her team. "Let's go." She looked back at Emily. "Stay close. I may have questions when I'm in there." They took Reyes through the OR doors, and Emily stood at the scrub sink and washed her hands for the 3rd time that night, which was something she did that had become a kind of reset. The water and the motion and the counting to 30 that her nursing instructor had drilled into her years ago in a different context entirely. Owens was in the hallway. He was sitting on the floor against the wall with his forearms on his knees, and he was looking at nothing in particular with the specific exhausted blankness of someone who has been running on adrenaline for a sustained period and has hit a momentary ledge. Emily came out of the scrub room and sat on the bench across from him. Not because she had time to sit, she didn't, exactly, but because she'd learned a long time ago in conditions where sitting down felt genuinely impossible, that the moments when you do it anyway are the ones that keep you functional for the next hour. "He's going to make it," she said, not a reassurance, an assessment. Owens looked up. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen people who weren't going to make it, and they look different." She paused. "He's lost blood, and he's cold, and he has shrapnel in his abdomen, but his pressure was responding to volume. His pupils are reactive. He maintained his airway throughout transport. Ewan is good. She's very good. He's in the right place." Owens looked at the OR door. "He's the best CO I've ever had, and I don't say that—" He stopped. Started again. "He's the kind of person who remembers things about you. That sounds small, but when you've had commanders who treat you like a serial number, someone who remembers that your sister just had a baby or that you're studying for a certification, it's not small." Emily didn't fill the silence. "He remembered you," Owen said. "Even before the investigation. He had your file. He'd read it all the way through. He kept saying that what happened to you was the failure point, that the whole network was able to keep going because the people who saw it first got buried before they could do anything." He looked at her. "He felt responsible, personally. He wasn't even in your chain of command." She'd thought about Warren Ashby every day for 3 years. She'd thought about him with a disciplined, specifically non-corrosive frequency. Not obsessively, not bitterly, but the way you think about a variable in a calculation that you haven't solved yet. She'd thought about the morning she'd received the paperwork, the specific smell of the processing office, the clerk who'd been kind in the rote way of someone who processed these papers regularly and had learned that being kind cost nothing. She thought about driving away from the installation with a box of personal items in the back seat and 3 months' severance and the flash drive in her right boot. She'd thought about the drive every day, its location, its integrity. The 11 documents on it that she'd copied from a server she'd had legitimate access to for approximately 36 hours before access was revoked. Documents she'd been careful to copy completely rather than excerpting, because she understood even then that incomplete evidence was worse than no evidence when it went in front of people with reasons to dismiss it. She'd waited. She'd gotten her nursing license. She'd come to Crestview because Crestview was a level 2 trauma center in a mid-sized city with no military installations, no defense contractors, nothing that would make anyone look twice at a nurse with a prior military service record. She'd waited for the investigation to reach her, or for some version of the future in which it was safe to come forward, whichever arrived first. She hadn't expected both to arrive simultaneously at midnight in a power outage. From the stairwell at the end of the corridor came a sound. Emily looked up. Owens heard it too. He was on his feet before the door opened, hand at his side, the trained response of someone whose body had made the decision before the conscious mind finished the analysis. The stairwell door opened and Holt came through it, and behind him, walking quickly, was a woman in civilian clothes. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back, a bruise forming along the left side of her jaw that was fresh enough to still be developing its full color. She was moving under her own power. She was moving like someone who had been delayed by force rather than circumstance, and the distinction was visible in the particular set of her shoulders and the way her eyes swept the corridor before she'd fully committed her weight through the door. Holt said, "Found her in a vehicle in the hospital parking structure, 3rd level. She'd been restrained." The woman looked at Emily. Her gaze had the quality of recognition, not personal recognition, but the recognition of a file come to life. "Emily Hart." "Major Vasquez," Emily said. Vasquez reached up and touched the bruise on her jaw. Not gingerly, more like checking a fact. "They redirected our flight and then boxed us on the ground. I lost 2 of my team in the separation. Holt's men found me." She looked down the hall toward the OR. "Reyes?" "In surgery," Emily said. "Good surgeon, responded to treatment. Best assessment is he makes it." Something in Vasquez's face changed. The particular change of someone who has been carrying a very specific fear for a very specific number of hours and has just been given permission to set it down without fully setting it down yet. Ashby, Vasquez said. Still in the ER. 3 contractors with him. Emily looked at Holt. Your men? 2 on the south entrance. Kowalski here. I've got enough to hold the surgical floor. He's going to move, Emily said. He knows we have Reyes, and he knows the contractors are liability at this point. If this escalates further and there are bodies or injuries, they become a forensic record. He's going to cut them loose and try to leave the building before anyone arrives who has actual federal authority. Vasquez said, I have federal authority. I have a warrant for Ashby's detention signed by a FISA-adjacent court order. It's in my vehicle on the 2nd level of the structure. She paused. Along with everything else. We need it, Emily said. I know. Vasquez looked at Holt. Can you get 2 men to my vehicle? Kowalski, Holt said. Take Owens. Vehicle's on the 3rd level. What's the make? Black Suburban, government plates, rear passenger door is unlocked. My identification and the court documents are in a red folder in the rear seat compartment. Vasquez handed Holt a key fob. The document pouch requires a secondary unlock. It's biometric, but I've set it to manual override with this. She produced a 4-digit code on a piece of paper from her inside jacket pocket. The paper was crumpled and slightly damp. She'd had it on her when she was restrained, which meant she'd protected it deliberately. Kowalski and Owens went through the stairwell door. Vasquez looked at Emily. You have the drive. Yes. You've had it for 3 years. Yes. Vasquez looked at her for a moment. There was something in the look, not precisely gratitude, something more complicated than that. The look of a person who has spent 14 months trying to reconstruct something that someone else spent 3 years protecting and has now arrived at the source, and the feeling of it is not simple. The documents on that drive, Vasquez said. The financial transfer records and the altered after-action reports. 63 pages of AARs, Emily said, and 11 months of financial transfers routed through 3 shell accounts. I have the account numbers and the routing signatures. Vasquez closed her eyes for approximately 1 second. That's the piece we couldn't find. We had everything around it, the mission compromises, the personnel records, the communication logs. But without the financial thread, we couldn't tie Ashby directly to the network. It was all circumstantial. She opened her eyes. With that, it's not circumstantial. I know, Emily said. That's why I kept it separate from the server archive. The archive was designed to be found. It was insurance, a decoy that would tell me if someone was looking. She paused. When Ashby told me it had been quarantined, he told me he'd been watching, which confirmed he had access to the archive, which puts him inside the server at a classification level that requires command-level authority. She looked at Vasquez. That's additional evidence. Vasquez looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has just discovered that the person they came to rescue had been running their own parallel operation for 3 years. You're not what I was expecting, Vasquez said. What were you expecting? A pause. Someone who needed rescuing. From the stairwell, rapid footsteps, going down, not up. Someone was moving through the building and they were moving fast, which meant something had changed in the ER, and the change was significant enough to produce urgency. Holt touched his earpiece. His expression shifted. Ashby is moving. He's broken from the ER and he's heading for the west exit. My man Diaz is on him, but he's alone down there. He's leaving the contractors? Emily said. Appears so. Vasquez was already moving toward the stairwell. I need to be the one. You don't have your documents yet, Emily said. You don't have the warrant. Vasquez stopped. The frustration of it was visible. A woman in her field who understood that chain of custody and proper authority were not bureaucratic formalities, but the actual architecture of a prosecution that would hold. Diaz can hold him at the exit, Holt said. He won't engage. He'll position. Buy us time. How much time? Vasquez said. 10 minutes. Maybe. Emily looked at the OR door. Reyes was behind it. Ewan was behind it. The surgery was ongoing, and Emily had done what she could do on this side of that door, and there was nothing else she could add to his survival from this corridor. She looked at Vasquez. "I'll go down." "No. Diaz is alone. Holt needs to stay on the surgical floor in case those contractors come up. You need the warrant before you can formally detain him." She was already moving toward the stairwell. "I don't need a warrant. I'm a civilian." "You're a civilian with a flash drive that is the cornerstone of a federal investigation," Vasquez said. "If Ashby gets to you before—" "He's not going to get the drive," Emily said. She pushed through the stairwell door. The stairs were concrete, and the emergency lighting in the stairwell was a single red strip along the lower wall, which cast a light that was more about direction than visibility. Emily went down 2 floors at a pace that was fast enough to produce efficiency and not so fast that she would arrive winded and tactically compromised. She'd learned that particular calibration in conditions where arriving out of breath had concrete consequences. She came through the door into the main floor corridor. The ER was to her left. The west exit was ahead and to the right, through the main waiting area, past the triage desk, through the double doors that opened onto the parking lot and the ambulance bay. She moved in that direction, and she could hear, from ahead, the sounds of the hospital resuming its ordinary functions in the corridors that didn't know what had happened in Trauma Bay 1. The soft PA announcements, the wheel squeak of a supply cart, the ambient sound of an institution that had a night shift because illness didn't observe business hours. She came around the corner into the waiting area, and she saw them. Diaz, one of Holt's operators, young, dark-haired, in the same tactical clothes as the rest of the team, was positioned near the double doors with his body language projecting a very specific kind of calm that was actually the opposite of calm. Across from him, 6 feet away, Warren Ashby stood with his hands at his sides. He was looking at the doors, not at Diaz, at the doors, and through them at whatever version of exit they represented. He heard Emily before he turned. Something in the shift of the ambient sound, or the particular quality of a presence that a person carries when they are not pretending to be something less than they are. He turned. She walked toward him steadily and stopped at a conversational distance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The waiting room was empty. Doyle had cleared it, per Emily's earlier instructions, and the overhead emergency lighting made the space look staged, like a set dressed for a scene that hadn't yet been filmed. "The drive isn't on you," Ashby said. It was almost impressed. Almost. "No. You've already transmitted it." "Not yet." He processed this. "Then where—" "Somewhere you can't reach before Major Vasquez comes through that stairwell door with a court-authorized detention warrant," Emily said, "which is going to happen in the next few minutes. The exact timing depends on how fast Specialist Owens runs." Ashby looked at her. The calculation in his eyes was doing something different now. It was no longer the calculation of a man assessing options. It was the calculation of a man counting what remains when the options run out. "You know what happens to you," he said. "Even if this goes the way you want, you become a witness. You spend the next 2 years in depositions and preliminary hearings and continuances. Your life is not yours during that time." "My life hasn't been mine for 3 years," she said. "I've been very patient." Something crossed his face. Not regret. She didn't think he was capable of regret in any form that resembled genuine recognition. It was closer to the expression of a man confronting an error in his original model. He had assumed, when he forced her out 3 years ago, that she would do what most people did when they were institutionally buried: collapse inward, grieve and adapt, and eventually stop looking at what they'd lost. He'd miscalculated the particular quality of her patience. "The men I work with," he said, "the institutional reach they have—" "I know," Emily said. "I've known for 3 years. I documented it." From the stairwell door behind her, the sound of it opening. Vasquez came through it with a red folder in her hand and Owens behind her. Vasquez's expression was the focused, forward-leaning look of someone carrying the thing they came for. She moved past Emily and stood in front of Ashby and opened the folder and held up a document. "Warren Ashby," she said. By authority of a sealed court order issued under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1030, and associated statutes, you are hereby detained pending investigation into charges including but not limited to conspiracy to obstruct a military investigation, unauthorized disclosure of classified operational information, and accessory to conduct resulting in the death of military personnel in the line of duty. She looked at him. You have the right to remain silent. Ashby looked at the document. He looked at Vasquez. He looked at Emily, standing 6 feet to Vasquez's left, in her plain scrubs with blood on the left cuff from 90 minutes ago. He said nothing. Diaz moved behind him with flex cuffs, and Ashby did not resist. And the reason he did not resist was the same reason that certain calculations produce inevitable conclusions. He was a man who had spent 20 years believing that institutional weight would always resolve in his favor, and standing in a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m. with a military warrant in his face and a flash drive he couldn't find, and a witness he hadn't been able to bury, the math had simply stopped working in the direction he required. Emily watched Diaz secure him. She watched Vasquez take Ashby's phone and his wallet and his key card and enumerate them into an evidence bag from her jacket pocket. She watched Owens take a photograph of the warrant alongside Ashby's face for the chain of custody record. She watched all of this and felt something that she didn't have a clean word for. Not triumph. Triumph required an audience, and she'd never been performing for anyone. Not relief. Relief implied she'd been afraid, and fear was not quite what she'd been carrying. It was closer to the sensation of setting down something heavy that you've been carrying for so long, you'd stop noticing the weight. And then you set it down, and the absence of it is almost disorienting. The way your arms feel strange and too light, and not entirely yours. She was standing there with that strange lightness when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize, and it said 4 words. They have your sister. Emily read the message twice. Not because she needed to read it twice to understand it, because her brain, which had been running at operational tempo for the last 2.5 hours, required exactly that long to shift gears, to move from the specific focused problem of Warren Ashby standing 6 feet away in flex cuffs to the entirely different and more personal problem that had just arrived in 4 words on a phone screen. They have your sister. She looked up. Vasquez was finishing the evidence enumeration. Diaz had Ashby by the arm. Owens was photographing the documentation. Nobody had noticed Emily stop moving. She looked back at the phone. Unknown number. The text had been sent 43 seconds ago, which meant whoever sent it had been watching, either the building or her, or both, and had timed it to arrive at the moment when the immediate threat was resolved and her guard was as close to down as it was going to get tonight. She thought about her sister Dana, 26, lived 40 minutes north of Crestview in a small apartment above a dry cleaning business, worked as an elementary school teaching assistant, called Emily every Sunday at 7 p.m. without fail, and had no idea, had been specifically kept in no idea, about any of what Emily had spent 3 years carrying. Emily typed back, "Proof." The response came in 11 seconds. A photograph. Dana's apartment living room. Emily knew the couch, the specific yellow throw pillow their mother had given Dana 2 Christmases ago, and Dana in the frame, sitting with her hands in her lap, a man standing behind her whose face was cropped from the shot. Dana's expression was the controlled blankness of someone who had been told to look calm and was doing their best. She was wearing the gray sweater she'd bought in March. Emily knew the sweater because Dana had texted her a photo of it when she bought it. The photograph had been taken tonight. Emily put the phone in her pocket and looked at Ashby. He was watching her with the particular attention of a man who has just registered a change in someone's posture and is calculating what it means. He didn't know about the text. She was certain of that. His expression wasn't triumphant. It was alert. She walked to Vasquez and said quietly, "I need 2 minutes." Vasquez read her face. "What happened?" Emily showed her the phone. Vasquez looked at the message, then the photograph. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Diaz. "Hold him here." She moved with Emily to the far side of the waiting room out of Ashby's earshot. "This isn't him," Emily said. He doesn't know. Look at him. He's reading my reaction and he can't figure out what he's looking at. Then who? Someone else in the network, someone who wasn't in this building tonight, who's been running a secondary protocol. Emily kept her voice level. If Ashby went dark, if the contractors failed to secure Reyes or the drive, there was a fallback. Use a personal asset, someone I'd protect. Your sister. Yes. Vasquez was quiet for 3 seconds. In Emily's experience, people who were good at their jobs were quiet for exactly that long before they spoke, because 3 seconds was the minimum required to think rather than react. Does your sister know where the drive is? No. Nobody knows where it is except me. But they think leveraging her will make you give it up. Yes. Emily looked at the OR doors at the end of the main corridor, visible through the waiting room's interior window. They're not wrong that it would make me consider it. Vasquez looked at her. Emily. I said consider. She met Vasquez's eyes. Dana doesn't know anything. She's a teaching assistant in a studio apartment. She's in this because she's related to me, which means this is my fault. It's Ashby's fault, Vasquez said. That's a distinction that won't matter to Dana at 3 a.m. with a man standing behind her couch. Emily looked at the phone again. I need a location. We can trace the number. How long? Vasquez paused. 20 minutes minimum, possibly 40. Emily shook her head. She typed into the phone. Tell me what you want and where she is. If she's hurt, no deal. The response took 31 seconds. Drive for the woman. Parking structure level 4 north stairwell. You come alone. 1 hour. She showed it to Vasquez. Vasquez's expression moved through several calculations. We can have people at the structure and if they see your people, they'll know I didn't come alone. Emily looked at the message. Level 4, north stairwell. That's a corner position with sight lines on 2 entry points and a vehicle exit. Whoever picked this location knows buildings. Former military? Or trained contractor? Either way, not a civilian. She put the phone in her pocket. I need Holt. They went back through the stairwell and up and found Holt on the surgical floor where Emily had left him, positioned outside OR2 with Kowalski on the opposite wall. The corridor was quiet and clinical and smelled of antiseptic and whatever floor polish the overnight crew had used. And the OR lights were still on, which meant Ewan was still working, which meant Reyes was still alive. Emily gave Holt the short version. He listened without interrupting, which was a quality she'd come to rely on in the last 3 hours. The specific discipline of a person who has been trained to receive information before responding to it. When she finished, he said, You're not going alone. I have to appear to go alone. Appear, he said. Okay. He looked at Kowalski. Can you get to level 4 of the parking structure via the exterior without going through the main entry or the ground level entrance? Kowalski thought. There's a fire access on the east face of the structure. It's a ladder. It goes up the outside. How long to reach level 4 that way? 7, 8 minutes if I'm moving. Holt looked at Emily. Give me 8 minutes before you enter the structure. If I'm late, You have an hour. Give me 8 minutes. He looked at her with the directness of someone making a request that is not quite a request. I'm not asking you to wait because I think you need protection. I'm asking because I need a position before you walk into a sight line. She understood the distinction, and she accepted it. 8 minutes. Kowalski. Holt nodded toward the stairwell. Kowalski was already moving. Emily looked at Vasquez. Ashby's contractors, the 3 from the ER. Where are they? My team has them in the south corridor, no weapons on them, and 2 of them are already asking for legal counsel, which means they're evaluating their exposure. They'll cooperate? The one who identified himself as team lead started cooperating approximately 4 minutes after I showed him the warrant. He gave me 2 names and an organizational address. Vasquez's expression was dry. People make different decisions when the protective authority above them is in flex cuffs. Emily looked at the OR door. Has Ewan said anything? Not since you went down, Holt said. No news from that room is good news. She knew that was true in a clinical sense. She also knew that no news had a specific texture at 3 in the morning that was different from the texture it had at noon, and she was human enough to feel that texture even when she knew it was not actionable information. She sat on the bench, not because she had time to, but because Holt had 8 minutes and she needed to use them for something other than standing in a hallway processing fear. Owens came out of the stairwell and saw her on the bench and sat down across from her without being invited, which she had come to understand was simply how he operated. A young man who moved toward things rather than away from them, not out of recklessness, but out of a genuine orientation toward engagement that the military had refined without producing. "What can I do?" he said. She looked at him. "Nothing right now." "Then what are you doing?" "Thinking." "About the structure?" "About Dana." She said it flatly, not inviting sympathy, just stating the fact of what she was thinking about. "She's going to be frightened. She's 26 and she's never... This isn't her world. She doesn't have a frame for it." Owens was quiet. "She calls me every Sunday," Emily said. 7 p.m. Without fail. I don't know if she does it because she worries about me or because she needs the anchor of it, or both. I've never asked." She looked at her hands. "I should have asked." It was the kind of thought that arrived in the gaps between action, the small unfinished accounting that a person carries and doesn't look at when there's work to do. She looked at it now, and then she put it away, because looking at it was useful for approximately 30 seconds, and then it became a different kind of weight. She stood up. "When Holt gives the signal, I'm going in." Owen stood too. "I know. Stay here. If Ewan comes out, I need to know immediately." "I'll call you." She started toward the stairwell and then stopped and turned back. "Owens." He looked at her. "The commander mentioned me," she said. "In the investigation." He felt responsible. She paused, choosing the words with the same precision she applied to clinical information. "Tell him, when he's awake, that he doesn't need to. What I did because it was the right thing to do. The time it took was the time it took." She held Owen's gaze. "Tell him I said it worked out." Owens nodded. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were steady. "I'll tell him." She went through the stairwell door. The parking structure was a 4-level concrete box attached to the hospital's west face by a covered walkway on the ground level and a sky bridge on the second. Emily used the ground-level walkway and entered the structure from the east side, which put her at the opposite corner from the north stairwell and gave her the longest possible approach. More exposure, more time in the sightlines of whoever was up there, but also more time for Holt and Kowalski to be in position. She walked at a pace that was not hurried. The structure was poorly lit at this hour. 3 of the overhead fluorescents on level 2 were out, and the amber emergency strips did what they could in the gaps. The cars were mostly the hospital staff's overnight vehicles, familiar in the way of things that belong to a place. The charge nurse's 10-year-old sedan, the attending's late model SUV, the ancient pickup that belonged to the facilities manager who had worked here longer than anyone could recall. Level 3. The ramp was concrete, and her shoes were soft-soled nursing shoes, and they were quiet on the incline. She kept her hands visible at her sides. She kept her pace even. She thought about the sightlines Kowalski would be working with from the exterior ladder and the 8-minute window, which had now been 7 minutes since she'd left the floor, and Kowalski had already been moving before that. Level 4. The north stairwell was in the corner ahead, and to her left, behind a support column. The sightline from the stairwell door covered 2 of the 3 approach routes to that corner. She was coming from the third. She stopped at the column's edge and listened. A sound, not movement, breathing, controlled, slightly elevated, someone who had been waiting and was working to stay calm. She came around the column. The man was mid-40s, compact, with the kind of build that wasn't large but was dense in the way of someone who maintained physical readiness as a professional requirement. He was standing with Dana in front of him. Dana, who was approximately Emily's height and coloring, But without the specific stillness that Emily had trained into herself, Dana, who was breathing fast and had been crying recently and was currently doing everything she could to hold it together, which Emily registered as quietly as she could register anything, while also maintaining tactical awareness of the man behind her sister. The man had a phone in his left hand and a weapon in his right hand. The weapon was not pointed at Dana, it was at his side. This told Emily he'd assessed the situation as one he controlled without requiring immediate demonstration of force, which meant he was experienced enough to know that visible threats created escalation, and he'd rather resolve this quietly. "Emily Hart," he said. He said her name the way Holt had said it, not a question. But the register was different, harder, more personal. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," Emily said. "You have something that belongs to my employer." "Former employer," she said. "Ashby's in custody." Something crossed the man's face, a very fast recalibration. He'd known this was possible. He hadn't known it had already happened. "Then the organization he worked with," he said, recovering. "There are people above Ashby, you know that." "There are always people above," Emily said. "That's how networks work. You go up the chain until you find the end of it." She kept her eyes on him, but her attention was on Dana. Dana's posture, Dana's breathing, whether Dana's hands were free, whether there was anything restraining her physically beyond the man's presence. As far as she could see, there wasn't. He was using proximity and the weapon as the mechanism of control, not restraint, which meant Dana could move if she had a reason and a direction. "The drive," the man said. "Hand it over and you both walk away. I have no interest in either of you past that." "Where's the drive?" Dana said. Her voice was very thin and very controlled. "Emily, what is he—" "It's okay," Emily said. "It is absolutely not. Dana," she said it quietly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to trust me." Dana looked at her across the 8 feet of concrete between them. Her eyes were red and her face was drawn, and she was 26 years old and none of this was her life. "I trust you," Dana said. Small voice. "True." Emily looked at the man. "The drive is not on me." "I know. We searched your locker in the ER staff area 20 minutes ago." He said it without satisfaction. Just information management. "And your car? Then you know it's not a simple handoff." "Tell me where it is." "I'll take you to it." She said it without hesitation. "You let her go first. She walks to the stairwell on the south end and goes down to the ground level. When she's clear, I take you to the drive." He looked at her. "You'd do that." "To protect her? Yes." She held his gaze and let him see that she meant it. Because she did mean it, in the specific way that she meant things, with full knowledge of what it cost and a willingness to pay. That was the truth of it. The drive was the most important thing she'd been carrying for 3 years, and she would trade it for her sister's safety without spending more than 4 seconds on the calculation. What she would not do was let him have it without the trade. He studied her. The south stairwell. Yes. He looked at Dana. He made the calculation that Emily had made of him. She watched him make it, watched his eyes move through the variables. Dana was not a tactical problem. Dana was a lever, and levers are only useful when the thing they're pressing against has somewhere to go. And if Emily was offering an exchange, the lever had served its function. "Go," he said to Dana. Dana didn't move immediately. She looked at Emily. "I'm not leaving you with—" "Dana!" Emily said it with everything she had, every ounce of the 3 years and the waiting and the specific love that had made her protect her sister from all of this for exactly as long as she had. "Go, now, south stairwell, all the way down, through the walkway into the hospital. Ask for Sergeant Holt. Say my name and say Holt's name, and don't stop moving until you find him." Dana looked at her for 2 more seconds. Then she moved. She walked past the man with her chin up and her pace controlled, and she went around the column toward the south end, and Emily listened to her footsteps on the concrete until they reached the stairwell door and the door opened and closed. The man watched Emily. "Okay," he said. "The drive." Before we go, Emily said, "What's your name?" He looked at her. "Why does that matter?" "It matters to me." A pause. "Callum, Callum." She said it once, filed it. "You should know that 2 of Holt's operators are on this level of the structure right now. They've been here for approximately 4 minutes. The one on the exterior ladder came up the east face. That's the one you don't have a sightline on from the stairwell door." Callum's posture changed. Not dramatically. He was too trained for drama. But the specific quality of his stillness shifted. "You're not going to shoot me," Emily said, "because shooting me means you never find the drive. And without the drive, the network has nothing. No leverage, no insurance, no counter-evidence to what Vasquez is already building." She watched him process this. "And if you hurt me, the man on the exterior ladder and the one on the south ramp will not be following the same restraint protocols that I've asked them to follow for the last 4 minutes. Callum looked at her. "Put the weapon down," she said, "on the concrete, and then tell me who sent you, because Ashby didn't know about Dana, and you had this operation running before tonight, which means someone above Ashby set this up as a contingency." He didn't move for 7 seconds. Then he crouched and put the weapon on the concrete and stood back up and said, "His name is Reginald Farr." Emily had never heard the name. "He's not military," Callum said. "He's Defense Acquisition Board. He brought Ashby in 12 years ago. Ashby was the military conduit. Farr was the civilian architecture. The financial transfers you documented. Farr is the source." He looked at the concrete. "I'm a contractor. I get paid. I don't go to prison for a man who isn't going to go to prison himself." "Where's Farr?" "He was in D.C. this morning. If he heard about Ashby, he's moving." From behind the column, Kowalski came around the edge with his weapon up and his posture in the compact ready position of someone who had been listening from close range for 2 minutes. From the south ramp, one of the other operators, the one Holt had repositioned, came into view. Callum looked at them and then back at Emily and said nothing because there was nothing particularly useful to say. Emily looked at Kowalski. "Get Vasquez, now. Tell her the name Reginald Farr, Defense Acquisition Board. Tell her he's the primary, and he's moving." She looked at Callum. "You're going to need to repeat everything you just told me to Major Vasquez, with documentation if you have it." Callum looked at her. His expression had arrived at a particular destination that Emily had seen on faces before. In the field, in the specific moment when a person realizes that the path they've been on has ended, and the only available question is what comes next. It wasn't quite defeat. It was closer to the exhaustion of someone who has been holding a position for a long time and has finally understood that the position was never going to hold. "I have documentation," he said. "Some of it." "Good." She picked up his weapon from the concrete and handed it to the operator from the south ramp without looking at it, and then she took out her phone and called Vasquez directly. Vasquez picked up on the second ring. "Talk to me." "Reginald Farr," Emily said. "Defense Acquisition Board. Ashby was his military conduit. The financial architecture is Farr's. The routing accounts and the shell companies will trace back to him." She paused. "He's been watching tonight. He knew about the operation. If he's moving, you have a short window." Silence on the line for 4 seconds. Then, "I need to make 2 calls. Stay on." The hold music was a generic tone, and it lasted 90 seconds. And then Vasquez came back with a voice that was still controlled but had acquired a new texture. The texture of someone holding something large and fragile and moving very carefully. "We have a flag on Farr's passport," Vasquez said. "He cleared Dulles at 1:47 a.m. on a private charter. Flight plan filed for—" "Hold on." A pause. "Flight plan shows Raleigh, but the charter company has a secondary destination logged in their system that doesn't match. Our aviation contact says the secondary is Monterrey, Mexico." "He's running," Emily said. "He is." Vasquez's voice had a quality that was close to, but not exactly, satisfaction. but his passport flag triggered a notification to Customs and Border Protection 40 seconds ago. If the charter lands anywhere on U.S. soil, they have him. If it crosses into Mexican airspace, another pause. I'm working on that part. Emily stood in the parking structure at 3:20 in the morning and looked at the concrete ceiling and felt the specific sensation of a very long chain of events, reaching something like its natural terminus. Not an ending. Endings were cleaner than this, but a convergence. The kind of moment where all the pieces that have been moving are visible in the same frame at the same time, and the picture they make is legible. She thought about the drive. Tucked in the false bottom of the water bottle she'd carried into work tonight, she'd modified it herself, 6 months after leaving the military, with a utility knife and waterproof adhesive, because the obvious hiding places were the ones people checked, and she'd had 3 years to think about what wasn't obvious. The water bottle was in her locker in the ER staff room. Callum's people had searched the locker and found the change of clothes and the personal items and the water bottle, which they'd apparently checked and replaced without finding the modification. She'd carried it every shift for 3 years. She was going to get it now and give it to Vasquez, and then she was going to find Dana. She started back toward the walkway, and then her phone buzzed again. Owens. She answered. "She's out of surgery," he said. "Ewan came out 5 minutes ago." She said. His voice caught briefly, the catch of someone who has been holding a particular fear for hours and is now releasing it in small increments. She said, "He's going to be okay. He lost his spleen and part of his liver. He'll be in recovery for weeks." But she said if he'd come in 20 minutes later. He stopped. She said whoever stabilized him did everything right. Emily was standing on the ramp between levels 3 and 4 of a parking structure at 3:20 in the morning with concrete walls and the smell of cold air and motor oil, and she put her hand on the wall and stood there for a moment. Not a long moment. Enough of one. "Tell you and thank you," she said. "She actually asked about you," Owen said. "She wanted to know who did the needle decompression." Emily looked at the wall. "Tell her it was the nurse." She walked down the ramp toward the walkway and toward the hospital where Dana was waiting and where the drive was still in the false bottom of the water bottle in the locker, undiscovered, 3 years of patience preserved in 11 documents that were about to become the most consequential evidence in a federal investigation she'd never expected to survive long enough to see. She was 30 feet from the walkway entrance when her phone buzzed a third time. Unknown number again. Different from the one that had sent the photograph of Dana. This one had a country code she recognized. Not U.S., not Mexico. She stopped. The message was short. Farr didn't go to Monterey. That was the cover. He has people at the hospital. They're already inside. He wants the drive and he wants you, and he has been in this building for the last 2 hours. She read it twice. She looked at the walkway. She looked at the hospital on the other side of it, lit in its amber backup and its ordinary fluorescent, full of its overnight staff and its patients, and Vasquez with Ashby in custody, and Holt on the surgical floor, and Dana somewhere in there looking for Holt, and not knowing that the network hadn't finished yet, that there was a level above Ashby that hadn't been touched, that Reginald Farr had been in the building longer than any of them. She typed back to the unknown number. "Who are you?" The response arrived in 4 seconds. "Someone who worked for Farr until tonight. He burned 3 of my people to keep the operation clean. I'm done." Then, before she could respond, "He's in the hospital administrator's office. 3rd floor, east wing. He's been using it as a command post since 11 p.m. He has 2 men with him, and he has a direct line to the charter company. He never planned to run. He planned to let Ashby take the fall and collect the drive from here." Emily looked at the message. Then she looked at the walkway. Then she turned around and went back up the ramp, not toward level 4, but toward the exterior fire access on the east face, because the hospital's 3rd floor east wing was accessible from the sky bridge on the 2nd level, and the sky bridge was accessible from the structure, and she was not going to walk into the hospital through the main entrance and up 3 floors to an office where Reginald Farr had been watching this entire operation unfold for 2 hours. She was going to come in from a direction he hadn't covered. She was going to come in the way she'd always moved through rooms that weren't hers, quietly, from an unexpected angle, in a way that nobody saw coming because they'd stopped looking for her a long time ago. The sky bridge was cold. It connected the parking structure's second level to the hospital's east wing at a point that most people use twice a day without thinking about it, arriving for their shift, leaving after it. And it was made of glass and steel framing, and it was cold at 3:30 in the morning because the heating system for a non-critical connector ran on a reduced overnight cycle. Emily crossed it at a pace that was fast enough to cover ground and quiet enough to not announce direction, and she was on her phone to Vasquez before she was halfway across. "Far is in the building," she said. "Hospital Administrator's Office, 3rd floor East Wing. He's been there since 11 p.m. He never intended to run. The Monterey flight was a decoy to pull your attention." Silence for 2 seconds. Then, "Source? Someone inside his operation who's flipping. I'm going to have to trust that, and so are you. Emily, do not go up there alone. Tell Holt, 3rd floor East Administrator's Office." She paused. "I'm already in the East Wing." She ended the call before Vasquez could finish the sentence that was forming, because the sentence was going to be a version of wait for backup, and waiting for backup was the correct tactical decision in most situations, and this was not most situations. Farr had been in this building for 2 hours. He'd watched Ashby get detained, watched his contractors fold, watched his contingency plan in the parking structure come apart. A man like that, a man who built architecture rather than executing it, would be doing one of two things: destroying evidence or preparing an exit that nobody had mapped. She needed to know which. The East Wing stairwell was inside the sky bridge door, and she went up it the way she'd gone down the parking structure ramp, fast, controlled, not rushing the thing that required precision. 3rd floor. She pushed through the door into the hallway. The East Wing's 3rd floor was administrative. Offices, conference rooms, the kind of carpeted corridor institutional space that was empty overnight and didn't require the same staffing logic as the clinical floors. The lights were at 30%. The administrator's office was at the far end, corner position, glass-fronted with interior blinds that had been pulled. Light was coming through the bottom gap of the blinds. She moved down the hall and stopped at the office beside the administrator's. An assistant's workspace, unlocked, dark. She went in and stood at the shared wall and listened. 2 voices. Low. One of them giving instructions, one receiving. The one giving instructions had the flat, deliberate cadence of a man who was very frightened and was using precise language to manage it. She'd heard that cadence before. It was the voice of someone performing control rather than possessing it. She heard a laptop being closed, the specific soft click of a bag being zipped. He was preparing to leave. She came back into the hallway, and she was 4 feet from the administrator's office door when it opened, and Reginald Farr walked out. He was 61, silver-haired, with the kind of physical presentation, slim, tailored even at this hour, good shoes, that spoke of a man who had operated his entire career in rooms where appearance was a form of currency. He was carrying a laptop bag over one shoulder and a phone in his hand, and he had the forward-leaning posture of a man mid-departure. And he walked directly into Emily's line of sight and stopped. Behind him, 2 men, the same template as Callum, trained, compact, waiting on his cue. Farr looked at Emily. His face went through 3 distinct expressions in approximately 1 second: surprise, recognition, and then a very fast reversion to the deliberate blankness of a man who has survived decades in a world that rewards the concealment of reaction. "Ms. Hart," he said. She noted that he knew her name without introduction. She noted the laptop bag. She noted that his 2 men had not moved. They were waiting to read him, and he hadn't cued them yet, which meant he still thought this was a situation he could talk his way out of. "Mr. Farr," she said. A brief pause. He was recalibrating the landscape. Ashby detained, contractors in custody, Callum presumably neutralized, the hospital's tactical picture entirely different from what it had been 2 hours ago. He was doing the math in real time, and the math was not resolving in his favor, and he was experienced enough to know it. "You're a nurse," he said, not dismissively, clinically, establishing the category. "Yes." "You've had a significant night." "It's been a while coming," she said. He looked at her with the specific attention of a man who has spent his career identifying leverage points. "The drive," he said. "I want you to consider something before this becomes irreversible, complicated." He adjusted the bag on his shoulder. A small movement, the kind that looks like a nervous habit and can also be a signal. What you have on that drive represents 3 years of your life. Your service record, your career, the time you spent in this hospital, invisible, waiting. He said the word invisible precisely, which told her he'd read her file thoroughly enough to understand what she'd been doing and why. That's a significant personal cost. And there are people with real authority, who are in a position to compensate that cost very specifically. Reinstatement of record, financial settlement, public. "I'm going to stop you there," Emily said. He stopped. "You built the financial architecture," she said. "The shell accounts, the routing structures. You brought Ashby in 12 years ago, and you used the operational access he provided to run a network that compromised classified missions and put operators in hostile custody and got people killed." She looked at him. "I documented the financial thread 3 years ago. The account numbers and routing signatures are on the drive. Everything Vasquez has been building for 14 months connects to what I have, and what I have connects to you." She paused. "There is no version of this conversation where I accept something you're offering." Farr looked at her for a long moment. The deliberate blankness shifted, fractionally, and what was under it was not the face she'd expected. Not coldness, not cruelty. It was something older and more tired, the face of a man who has been managing consequences for so long that he'd lost track of the original thing that started them. He looked at his 2 men. He looked at the hallway behind Emily, and then Holt came through the stairwell door at the end of the hall, and Kowalski came through the one at the other end, and Vasquez was behind Holt with her credentials already out, and her voice carrying the specific authority of someone who has been waiting for exactly this room and this moment and this man. "Reginald Farr," Vasquez said, moving down the hall at a pace that was not running but was unambiguously forward. "I have a federal detention order. Put the bag on the floor." Farr's 2 men read the hall. 2 armed operators at each end, Vasquez with documentation, Emily in the middle, and made the calculation that trained professionals make when the tactical math is unambiguous. They stepped back. One of them put his hands up without being asked, which told Emily he'd been in this position before and had learned something from it. Farr set the laptop bag on the floor. He did it slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who was not surrendering so much as acknowledging a conclusion he had already reached internally. He straightened up and he looked at Emily one more time, and his expression had arrived somewhere that she could only describe as the specific exhaustion of a long performance finally ending. "You spent 3 years as a nobody in an ER," he said. "For this?" "Yes," she said. He seemed to genuinely not understand that, and she found, standing in that hallway at 3:40 in the morning, that she had nothing to add to it. Vasquez reached him, and he did not resist, and that was that. The drive came out of the false bottom of the water bottle at 4:15 a.m. in the ER staff lounge, with Vasquez watching and a federal evidence technician documenting, and Cole standing in the doorway with his coffee cup and an expression that had passed through every available register of the night and arrived somewhere quietly stunned. 11 documents, 63 pages of altered after-action reports, 11 months of financial transfers with account numbers, routing signatures, and 3 shell company identifiers that Vasquez's team spent the next 4 hours tracing to Farr's personal holding structures through 2 intermediary LLCs. Emily handed over the drive without ceremony. It was a small object. It had been a very heavy one. She sat in the staff lounge for 20 minutes after Vasquez left, and she drank the worst coffee she'd ever tasted, which was hospital lounge coffee at 4 in the morning, and she stared at the wall and thought about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of luxury. Dana found her there. She came in still wearing the gray sweater, her eyes red-rimmed and her hair pulled back badly, and she stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at Emily, the way you look at a person when you've recently had cause to consider what it would mean if they weren't there. "You want to explain any of that?" Dana said. "Most of it," Emily said. "Not all of it. Some of it's still classified." That's a sentence I genuinely did not expect to hear from you." "I know." Dana came and sat across from her. She looked at the coffee and decided against it. "How long?" she said. How long has all of this been happening?" "The thing I was carrying, the evidence, 3 years." Emily looked at her hands. "What it was about, 4 years. Before that I didn't know." "You didn't tell me." "No." "You were protecting me." "Yes." Dana was quiet for a moment. Outside the lounge, the hospital was beginning its pre-dawn shift change, the particular sound of an institution reorienting itself toward morning, carts moving, voices at the nurses' station, the ambient machinery of a place that does not stop for anyone's private crisis. "You could have told me," Dana said. "I would have." "You would have worried," Emily said. "Every Sunday call for 3 years you would have worried, and you couldn't have done anything with the worry except carry it, and it wasn't yours to carry." She looked at her sister. "It was mine." Dana looked at her for a long time. "You're very stubborn." "Yes." "You get that from Mom." "I know." Dana reached across the table and put her hand over Emily's and didn't say anything else. And Emily looked at their hands on the table and felt something that she'd been holding at arm's length all night. Not the tactical calculation, or the clinical assessment, or the 3-year patience, just the plain human fact of having someone who showed up every Sunday at 7 p.m. without being asked, because love sometimes expresses itself as punctuality. She was not going to cry in the hospital staff lounge, but it was closer than she'd been in a while. Commander David Reyes was moved out of the ICU on the 3rd day. He'd lost his spleen and a portion of his liver, and he was going to spend 6 weeks in a military medical facility before anyone cleared him for anything more strenuous than walking the length of a corridor. And he knew this and accepted it with the pragmatic grace of a man who has had worse news delivered in worse places. Emily came to see him on the 2nd day, which was the first day he was coherent enough to hold a conversation that wasn't with the nursing staff about his pain management. He was smaller than she'd expected. Awake. In the trauma bay, he'd been an emergency, a body requiring intervention, a set of vital signs to be managed. Upright against a hospital pillow, pale and patched and blinking at the window light, he was a person. 50s, lined face, the particular kind of tired that surgery leaves in a person for weeks afterward. He looked at her when she came in and said, "You're shorter than I expected." "People say that," she said. "Owen said you told him it worked out." "It did." He looked at her for a moment. "I owe you more than that phrase covers." "You were trying to close an investigation that needed closing," she said. "You don't owe me anything for that." "I owe you for what happened 4 years ago," he said. "The separation. I was 3 levels up the chain from your direct command, but I had access to your file and I saw what was happening, and I was building my own case, and I told myself there wasn't enough yet to intervene, that intervening would compromise the investigation." He stopped. That was true. It was also the easier answer. Emily sat in the chair beside his bed. She'd thought about this conversation in some form for 3 years, had rehearsed versions of it that ranged from cold to exact to something she couldn't quite name. Sitting in it, the rehearsed versions all seemed to belong to a different person. "The investigation is what mattered," she said. "It needed to be built correctly or it wouldn't have held. I understood that then. I understand it now. That doesn't mean what happened to you was acceptable." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't." She looked at him. "But it's done now." He nodded. He looked at the window. The morning was coming in gray and even, and the city outside was doing what cities do at 8 a.m., which is to say it was going about its business without any particular awareness that anything had been resolved overnight. "Far's in federal custody," Reyes said. "Ashby's counsel has already filed, but there's nowhere to file to. The financial evidence alone closes every door." He paused. "Your military record is being formally reviewed. I'm told the JAG office expects a recommendation for full reinstatement within 2 weeks." Emily looked at her hands. "Okay. Your rank, your service record, your commendations, all of it restored." He looked at her. "And there's a formal citation being prepared for both the tactical medical intervention and the role you played in the investigation. It's going to be specific, and it's going to be public, and it's going to say your name correctly and in full." She said nothing for a moment. 3 years of invisible. 3 years of restocking suture kits and covering extra shifts and eating lunch alone and absorbing every version of just a nurse as if it were simply weather, something that happened to her, rather than something anyone chose. "There's something else," Reyes said. He reached to the bedside table, slowly, with the careful economy of someone whose abdomen was recently opened and resealed, and picked up a folder. "I don't expect an answer now, or soon, but I want you to read it." She took the folder. The cover sheet was military letterhead, and the title of the proposal was 12 words long, and she read all 12 of them, and then she looked up. "A tactical medical unit," she said. "Small, new, specifically designed to operate at the intersection of medical intervention and field intelligence, the gap that this whole operation exposed." He held her gaze. "There's nobody better qualified to build it than someone who has lived on both sides of that gap." He paused. "The position would be civilian attached with full operational authority. You design the training protocols, select the personnel, establish the doctrine." Another pause. "It would mean leaving this ER." Emily looked at the folder in her hands. She thought about the ER, about bed turnover and supply inventory, and the particular amber light of the overnight shift, and the way Patricia Doyle held her clipboard. She thought about the 16-year-old with the concussion, whose discharge papers had sat for 2 hours, and the elderly woman's family she'd drawn the medication chart for on a paper towel, and the invisible 1,000 small things that had kept a floor running every shift for 3 years. She thought about what it had cost her to be invisible there, and she thought about the choice she'd made, to be invisible, to wait, to hold the thing she had until it could mean something. It had been the right choice. She didn't regret it. But it had been a choice made in a specific context for a specific purpose, and that context was over. "I'll read it," she said. "Chut." She walked out of Crestview Medical Center for the last time on a Friday morning in April, 3 weeks after that night. Her resignation had been accepted with the stunned formality of an institution that had suddenly and publicly learned the full weight of who had been restocking their supply carts, and there had been a meeting in the administrator's office. A different administrator now, the previous one having offered to resign once the scope of the evening's events became clear, where people said things to Emily that were true and came approximately 3 years too late. She accepted them without bitterness and without performance. They were owed, and she received them and she moved on, because she had never been in this for the acknowledgement. She'd been in it for the thing itself. The morning was cold and bright, and the parking lot was full of the ordinary vehicles of people doing their ordinary work, and the city beyond the hospital's perimeter was going about its morning with total indifference to everything that had happened here, which was as it should be. Dana was waiting by Emily's car. She was holding 2 coffees from the place 3 blocks away that was not the hospital lounge, and she handed one over without a word, and they stood there in the parking lot in the cold April light and drank them. "What now?" Dana said. Emily looked at the hospital. At the entrance she'd walked through 1,000 times in plain scrubs, ID badge clipped to her collar, invisible by design. "Now I build something," she said. She didn't elaborate, and Dana didn't ask her to, because some things announced themselves by their shape rather than their label, and the shape of what Emily was walking toward was clear enough. A door she'd earned with 3 years of patience and 11 documents, and a water bottle with a false bottom, and the specific refusal to disappear just because someone powerful had decided she should. She'd been underestimated by the kind of people who do that habitually, who look at a quiet woman in plain scrubs behind a medication cart and see furniture instead of a person, who confuse stillness with passivity, who mistake the absence of declaration for the absence of substance. They'd been wrong in the particular way that people are wrong when they let assumption do the work that attention should do. She was 31 years old. She had her name back, her record back, her history back, all the things that had been taken from her and that she'd refused to let define the limits of what she could do without them. She had a folder on her kitchen table with a 12-word title and a position that didn't exist yet and needed someone to build it from the ground up, which was hard work, which was the kind of work she was good at. She had Dana every Sunday at 7 p.m. She had the morning, cold and bright, and entirely, specifically, unreservedly hers. She finished the coffee. She got in the car. She drove out of the parking lot, and she did not look back, because looking back was for people who were still deciding whether to leave. And she had chosen to leave on her own terms at a time of her own determining. That was the whole of it. That was what 3 years of invisible had been for, to arrive at a morning where the choice was hers to make, and she made it with both hands. Some things cannot be buried, no matter how much power is applied to the effort. Truth is one of them, and the quiet, patient, unannounced strength of a person who has decided to wait until the moment is right. That is another. Emily Hart drove toward the city, and the city received her, and the morning continued, and the world went on, and somewhere in a federal holding facility, Warren Ashby was meeting with his fourth attorney, and Reginald Farr was discovering the specific quality of accountability that descends on a man when every financial thread he spent 12 years weaving has been pulled at once. And in a military medical facility, a commander was walking the length of a corridor for the second time that day and adding 12 feet to yesterday's total. And in a parking lot outside an elementary school, a teaching assistant in a gray sweater was watching a group of 7-year-olds chase each other between the benches and thinking that this, specifically this, was the life she wanted, and she had it. And in the city, in a car moving through an ordinary April morning, a woman who had once been invisible was not invisible anymore. She had never actually been. They'd just never looked.